Thank you, council members and City Manager Bunning, City Attorney Hudson. I'm going to walk through this. I'm a little bit new to this too, but I've been studying the results for about a week and a half or 2 weeks since we got them. And interrupt me if you have questions, and we will just sort of plow through. And Mary covered some of this, so I don't need to be terribly redundant, but it is why do we survey and what do we look for? So we asked citizens questions, and most of the answers were, are you highly satisfied with this service, satisfied, dissatisfied, or highly dissatisfied? And what the surveyors say is that you want to look for 80% satisfaction. So you group the satisfied and highly satisfied together, and you hope that 80% of them, or that is 80% of your number. So any service that falls below 80% is really where you want to take a second look. Some services always rank higher across the board, and some lower. It's just a function of what they do. It doesn't mean the people who do them are doing a bad job. It's just that, for example, everyone loves the fire department, and streets and roads tend to rank a little lower. So how we did it, this was the first year we included cell phones in the survey. About 20% of the respondents were reached via cell, 80% via landline. It's more than 300 households. They oversample a little to make sure they're getting demographic representation and representation from all the zip code areas in the city. It is an incredibly long survey. It's at least 18 minutes long. It's about 80 questions. And so I really appreciate that people had the patience to give us this information and this much time. And in fact, the survey firm said people were actually happy. They're happy to be asked for their input and gave up their 20 minutes of supper time, which is probably when we called. I think we called between 7 and 9:30 p.m. So who participated? On the left are the mean results from the things that could be averaged. 47 years old. They've lived in Hampton for an average of 24 years, and the average yearly income is close to $60,000. Things you can't average, 73% were homeowners, 10% were active duty military, 50% were white, 42% were black. That's a little less than our census numbers, but not terribly far off, and 8% other. They did not ask mixed race, so I would assume some of those are in the other category. There are some big picture questions, and that's what I wanted to go over first. And these are policy and characteristics of the city, I mean, the things that really define us. Overall quality of life. So people were asked, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with your overall quality of life in Hampton? And this is a pretty impressive number. 90% of our residents are happy with the quality of life in our city. So what I told you I did was I took the satisfied and dissatisfied into the pie chart. But when you look at trend data, because frankly our numbers are so good, you don't see much difference year to year in the number of people satisfied and dissatisfied. So on that scale, they were ranking us between 1 and 4, 1 being extremely dissatisfied and 4 being extremely satisfied. So when I looked at the trend data, I did it a little bit differently. Oop, that one's not a trend one. Sorry, I'll get to that. Okay, so other things that involve policy and big picture, you guys. I know how to inform the city about how I feel on issues. 83% agreed with that number. And here's one of those trend lines. And what I did, instead of just saying satisfied and dissatisfied, you take the extremities into account. So the average number was right about 3 on this. So the average resident was satisfied. And what you can see here is a trend line that creeps up a little bit. So even though we started with very, very high scores back in '97, and I'm saying we even though I wasn't in the city at that point, you can see some real steady growth. On management issues, before city management makes an important decision, it considers the opinions of citizens who want to be heard. This one's a little lower, but 71% agree with this statement, 29% disagree. But again, on the trend line, you see a little bit of an uptick. When you draw a straight line, you don't see it, but from 2006 to 2012, there's definitely been a little improvement in those numbers. On fairness, so that's generally speaking, my neighborhood receives the city services it needs. 87% agree. And that one definitely has seen some uptick over the years. Availability of information, this was one of those pretty astonishing numbers. People were asked if they can get, or if they're satisfied with the amount of information they get about what's going on in the city and city services. 94% satisfied. And again, that one has seen some pretty good improvement. Some of those numbers that go up and down are going to be margin of error. When you're surveying 300 or so people, you're going to see some variation from year to year. And that's why I put the trend line in, because it's very hard to see unless you look at it over time. Overall work performance of employees, 93% were satisfied. That is a pretty astonishing number for any government of any size anywhere in this country, for people to say that 93% are happy with what your staff does. And that even has seen growth. I mean, that very impressive number has been a pretty steady climb. You see a little bit of variation year to year. Courtesy of city employees, again, 93% of our citizens say that our employees are courteous. And again, a little bit of growth, a little bit of steady growth. And you only see that by pulling in the people who are extremely satisfied. They're what's pulling up that average. Traffic flow in neighborhoods, again, they call this one a characteristic because it's not one delivery, one-time annual budget kind of thing. So traffic flow in neighborhoods, 88% satisfied, which is pretty good. You'll see another traffic statistic that's not quite that good. A little bit of an uptick. If I go too fast, stop me. If you have questions, I may or may not be able to answer them, but I'll take them down and get back to you. How safe do you feel in your neighborhood? Are you satisfied with how safe you feel in your neighborhood? 87% yes. And again, that's not a question we've been asking since the very beginning, but it is either steady or climbing a little bit over time. Overall appearance of the city, 86% are satisfied. Oh, percent, that one is one that rounded, sorry, so that adds up to more than 100. And that one is one where you probably see a little bit of downturn over the years. It's very slight. It's hard to tell because there's some ups and downs. My assumption there, if I can make one, would be budget may be impacting this one a little bit in terms of crime and grime and how often we mow and plantings and things like that. Beautification and landscaping specifically, 86% satisfied. And that one is pretty steady. I don't think that's really up just from the way the numbers go. Traffic flow on main roads, 78%. So this one drops below that 80% benchmark. I think we all know we have traffic. I think the main roads are also, the VDOT issue and the funding issue. But it is an improvement, and especially over recent years. Condition of main roads, and this is where you're going to see the lowest numbers probably in this survey. Only 69% of our citizens are satisfied with the condition of our roads, and that actually is a little bit of a trend up. And the condition of neighborhood streets is even lower, 65% are satisfied. And I talked to Public Works anticipating questions or concerns about this since it is the lowest numbers. And they basically do surveys of the roads every year. They know this. In fact, their numbers are, it's more like 50% of our streets are not in the condition they would like them to be. And it is strictly a matter of funding and what we as city taxpayers want to pay to remedy this if we do.
Councilman Moffitt, I'm not sure your title currently. So. The man with the gavel.
Councilman Stewart, go ahead.
Sure, just had a quick question to the city manager. There's actually a vital role that our citizens can play related to potholes. Is that not correct? In other words, self-reporting?
Absolutely. Since you gave me that opportunity, we do take reports of potholes or other road conditions, sidewalk, any matter for that matter, but since you asked about the roads, via our 311 call center, which is available effectively, it's available every day of the week and from like 7 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. What happens when you call that number is you will get an up-to-date estimate as to how long it might take us to respond to that pothole. Depending upon conditions, it may be that we can get to it within a week. It may be that we can get to it within 3 weeks. But whatever it is, the customer advocate is able to inform you that you can expect to have that reviewed and taken care of within a specified period of time, so you know what to expect. And and we get that information to our Public Works Department, and they get out there as quickly as possible to resolve it. We have, roving crews, and we try to catch all of those, but sometimes we do miss them. So as Mr. Stewart pointed out, please feel free to call them in at our 311 call center.
Absolutely. So those were city characteristics, at least according to the surveyors, and I'm not entirely sure how they're different from city services and service delivery, but they have it broken out, so I respected those categories. So these are satisfaction with city services, and this is actually a pretty amazing number. Out of 20 city services, 19, I forget the exact number, only one ranked below that 80% benchmark. So fire, as I said, everyone happy, but also, they feel like the fire department is doing what it needs to do. We have enough fire stations. They're happy with that, 99%. Pretty astonishing number, actually. And that has gone up a little bit over time. You can see from the trend there. And again, since that's above 3, basically that means everybody almost ranked them in that 3, and several people ranked them in the 4 to pull up that average. Paramedic and ambulance, almost the same thing, 97% satisfied. And again, that is creeping up. It's hard to go up when you're already ranked at about 3.25, but they're doing it. Garbage collection, 97% satisfied. And that is actually a dramatic trend up. They've been steadily increasing since 1997. Police department, 96% satisfied. And what's interesting about this number, in addition to being a big number and very satisfied, is that 47% of the people we talked to had contact with the police department in the past 12 months. And of that, half of the survey respondents, they rated the department higher than people who didn't have contact. So what you're seeing is the perception is good, but the reality of the contact people have with the police department is actually even better. And that trend has mostly gone up. You see a little dip, but it's been going up pretty steadily since 2006 or so. Curbside recycling, 95% satisfied. This is another one where the people who use it rank it higher. Remember that if you live in an apartment complex, you don't get this service. So I think that's where that gap comes. And this one is really bumping up. 311 call center, 95% satisfied. Interestingly, only 50% of the citizens who were surveyed actually use this, but people know about it, they know it's there, and they feel good about it. So if they do need it, I think they understand. And the people who actually called had a significantly higher rating than the population in general. And you can see this one has been creeping up. Some of that's strictly from the recognition, but probably also word of mouth and people telling other people about it. Public libraries, 95% satisfied, and 65% of our citizens reported that they had used the library in the past 12 months. And again, users rated it significantly higher than the people who had not been in the library in the past year. And that is actually pretty flat, maybe dropping a little bit. Community centers, 92% say they're satisfied. This one is a smaller number. Only 36% of our residents had been inside a community center this year. And on this one, ratings were the same for people who used it and people who didn't. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but there you go. That rating has been increasing over time as well. Most of these lines go up, some of them are flat, and only 1 or 2 go down, which when you start with ratings in the 3, trying to move that needle is actually very hard. Cultural and arts programs, 90% satisfied, and this is a number that surprised me given what people have said in our budget surveys, but 42% of our citizens attended a program in the past 12 months. That would presumably be the Charles Taylor Art Gallery or American Theater. And the people who used it rated it higher than those who didn't. So you're satisfying your users at a higher rate. And that has increased over time. Youth sports, 90% are satisfied. And a lot of that is perception, because this is a pretty tiny audience. Only 16% had a child that actually used the youth sports programs. But those people did rate it higher. And that's gone up as well. Parks, 90% satisfied, and 64% of our residents had visited a city park this year. And those who used the service rated it significantly higher than those who didn't. Yeah. Yes, Councilman.
Yeah, Robin, if you could help me just a little bit. When you say 64% of our residents visited, are we saying 64% of the people who responded to the survey?
Correct. But since that's a scientific survey, you can extrapolate that within plus or minus 5%, it is roughly true of the population. So, yeah. And city parks is actually pretty flat over time. Same level of satisfaction or a little bit of bumping. Parenting programs. Oops, I thought I had the percentage of people who use this. This is one where 89% are satisfied, and it isn't used by a huge number of people, and I don't guess we asked on this. I think I thought I saw something later about it, but I could be wrong. And that trend has been going up as well. This would be the healthy families and the resources we have. Public health numbers, 89% satisfied with our public health department, and that it's gone up a tiny bit, but it's basically flat over time. Applying for a permit. This is a weird one, and I wish I'd looked at this question before we asked it. It's applying for a permit of any type. So this lumps in people who need a building permit with people who need a yard sale permit or a codes permit to have, you know, a pod in their front yard if you need one or things like that. So I'm not sure. This is an odd number, but again, it's very good. 88% of our citizens are satisfied with how easy it was to apply for a permit. And that number has gone up over time. This year shows actually a slight drop, but that could be just the statistical variation. Hampton Coliseum Entertainment also rated very high, 88%. 44% had been to the Hampton Coliseum in the last year, and again, those people who go out to it like it. So we're providing the programming for the people who are most likely to come. And that has gone up over time. In fact, over the past few years, that's moved up quite a bit. Social services, 87% are satisfied. This would probably largely be a perception question because I doubt that we have a huge representation on the survey, but we may have, and that number is going up pretty steadily. Flatline since about 2006. Encouraging the appreciation of diversity. 86% are satisfied with what we do here, and that would be the Unity Commission and the workshops that they do. There were a few questions in here where people just didn't respond. They said they didn't know enough to actually answer the question, and those numbers were just dropped out. They were not put in the satisfied or the dissatisfied category. And when I looked through, some of those were on parenting programs and some of those were on the diversity question. So either people don't have an opinion or we could still make people a little more aware of some of our diversity programs that we offer. And that number's gone up a little bit. It's pretty close to flat. Adult recreation, 84% are satisfied. This was used by 16% of the respondents, but again, those people who are in those programs are very, very happy with those programs, and that number's gone up over time. It's a little bit flat since 2004. Public beaches, we asked this year for the first time, so there's no trend data. But the reason we did it is, in my mind, city employees think of Buckrow and the public beaches as part of the parks because it's the Parks Department and it's Buckrow Park. But I think the public doesn't always know that the beach is a park, and so I wanted to ask it as a separate question. And it actually rated a little bit lower than the rest of the parks. Satisfied with the public beaches, 84%. Now that could be anything from the condition to the hours to I want to take my dog. Could be anything, and there's nothing to compare that to. Public schools is actually the only city service that ranked below that 80%. 33% of the respondents had a child in the public schools, and on this one, the user and non-user ratings are the same. So if you're not in the school system, your view of it is pretty similar to people who do have children in the school system. This is not new. It's been this way for a while. Maybe the schools are harder to please. I don't know. It's a tough audience.
And if you don't mind me interrupting for 1 second, Robin, we all take it for granted, but for the benefit of the viewing public, it's not actually a city service.
It's a Hampton
Right. But we
city
include
service,
it-
but it's
right.
not through the council and the city staff. The school
Right.
board is separately elected and managed not by this body.
Right, but since the beginning of the survey, it was something that the school systems had asked us to go ahead while we were out, with the scientific process, an external firm, to include that question, and so we have, as a courtesy, included it. But I know a lot of times people think the council actually has authority over the school system, and they don't legally have that authority, so it's just a good moment to pause and make sure folks know that that's really done by the independently elected school board.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. People were asked toward the end of the survey, what is the one thing on which you think the city should focus? And first of all, I think people were tired. This was a 20-minute survey, and so there weren't large numbers of people actually saying anything by this time. But improving the schools and reducing crime were the number 2 things mentioned. It's interesting, though, that number 3 was, I have no complaints, keep up the good work. That ranked ahead of improving the roads or more police patrols. So it really does reinforce the rest of the survey, in which people are pretty darn happy. You wouldn't necessarily think that from the public comment sessions, but the bulk of our public is very, very happy.